Chapter 4, Contract Law. So, key points in this chapter. For a contract to exist, there must be offer, acceptance, consideration, the service must be legal or possible, and the parties must have the capacity to enter into the contract. An offer in a shop is when the goods are paid for at the till, not when the price is put on the shelf. Placing the goods on the shelf and providing a price is only an indication to treat. On a website, an offer is typically accepted by the seller when the goods are dispatched, not when the payment's taken. And there usually be terms on the website that will say that the offer is only made when the goods are dispatched, not when the payment's taken. An offer may not be made, but might only be an indication of price. So that would be a quote. So a quote is not really an offer. And it's not saying that I'm offering you this. It's just giving you an indication of price, and they could change their quote at any point in the future. An offer may be revoked by the offeror before acceptance. So they might have to do that because the offeror has revoked it. It could be rejected either outright by the offeree, or it could be rejected by the offeree by means of a counter offer. So if you make a counter offer for something, that rejects the initial offer. Or it might just let it relapse after a given length of time. Consideration must be given, otherwise the agreement's only a promise. So for a promise between us, so for example, if we both agree that we're going to promise to share lottery winnings, so I buy a ticket and I say I'll give you half if I win. That's just a promise. There's no transfer of value between us, therefore there's no consideration. So that is not that's not a contract, and you can't. And if I happen to win the lottery, you couldn't come along and say, "Well, Michael, you agreed to give me half." It's not a contract. To discharge a contract, it must be performed. So that's requiring specific, not partial performance, so it's sort of complete and specific performance, not partial. It could be breached, so we could breach the contract. And that might lead to damages, it might not, or it could be terminated. However, failure of part of the contract, partial performance, may only be a minor part of the contract and allow just for damages and not withdraw from the contract. So if let's say you're a house builder and one of the tiles falls off in the kitchen, I can't go, haha, that's not specific, complete performance in there, have your house back. They just sort of say, well, there's the money for fixing the tile. Damages can be set out in the contract, so we can set out damages in the contract if the other party fails to complete the contract and breaches it. Those are known as penalty clauses. But penalty clauses must only cover reasonably foreseeable losses, not designed to intimidate performance by reason of very high penalties beyond the loss incurred. So that would be remember when we're looking at civil law. Civil law is only designed to restore the person to the same position before the breach of civil law. It's not designed to punish, unlike criminal law, and so we can't have penalty clauses that are unreasonable within civil law and contract law, because that would be punishment for not doing something. Legal damages are typically monetary damages. So in terms of what we're after, in terms of our sort of our restitution under civil law for contracts being broken, typically monetary damages, but it could also be withdrawal from the contract. So legal damages are monetary damages and withdrawal from the contract. If this is insufficient, the claimant could pursue equitable remedies, provided that the claimant qualifies for equitable remedies. Pretty much that they've done it within a reasonable time, and also as well that they've come to this sort of this thing with clean hands. They've acted in an equitable way. If they tricked the other person, then that wouldn't work. That wouldn't allow them to have equitable remedies. Now, another part of contract law is we've got the Consumer Rights Act, really, and you can't give up your consumer rights under the Consumer Rights Act, really. So although we could have a contract that says that there's no right to return this particular item, well, the Consumer Rights Act actually comes in and sort of says, well, yes, there is a right to return the item. So you can't as a consumer, a member of the public, give up your Consumer Rights Acts. Now that is a summary really of the key points of contract law. So I'd always return to this particular summary sort of section, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it in much more detail, and that will allow you then to sort of really understand this, and then just be doing the summary sections as your revision. So what is contract law and the requirements for contract? So Contract law covers agreements between individuals and how those agreements can be enforced, or remedies for when those agreements are breached. The contract is an agreement between the parties that the law will recognise and treat as legally binding. Contracts do not have to be written, except in the case of certain contracts like property contracts. You can't have a verbal property contract, so they can be verbal or inferred. In order for a contract to exist, there must be an offer by one party that's accepted by the other party, and so we'll have a lot of questions about offers and what are offers. There must be consideration, and so we need to have consideration being some form of transfer of value from both parties. It can't be just a transfer of value from one party. It has to be consideration is a transfer of value from both parties. The transfer of value from just one party is a promise. So the key one is that I get a lottery ticket and I agree that we'll share the winnings if I win. You've not given me anything for that. There's no transfer of value to me from for that thing. That's just a promise. If I did happen to win the lottery, I could still tell you to go do one. You're not having half my winnings. It must be legal or possible to make the contract. So legal and along with legal is possible. So there's two sort of things here. The goods or services are legal, so it's not possible to enforce a contract for the supply of, let's say, illegal firearms, or to seek damages when provided. So I could agree that I'm going to sell you a whole series of guns, but it's not legal for me to sell you guns, and you can't come along and say, well, actually, I lost out on some kind of bank robbery that you're going to do or whatever, and claim some damages for me because I didn't provide the guns. It's not legal. It's got to be, it's got to be possible as well. So, two things on the possible side, really. One is, it's possible. I could agree that I'm going to sell you a unicorn, but unicorns don't exist, and I can't sell you one, so it's not possible. So you can't have a contract for the sale of unicorns. Live ones, anyway. I could sell you a stuffed version of it. But also as well, there's certain times where it's going to be possible to actually, you can't give up certain legal rights. So you can't give up the Consumer Rights Act rights as a member of the public. So one party can't give up the legal rights that would otherwise be enforceable. So, for example, a company could not include a clause stating the Sale of Goods Act does not apply. Sale of Goods Act or the Consumer Rights Act. So you can't have that. And then the person must have the capacity to make the contract. So there's two things here. Contracts are difficult to enforce for under 18-year-olds. So let's say they can't be forced to repay loans. So sometimes where you sort of see you'll see under 18-year-olds can't get access to things like debit cards and to things like credit cards, because they can't be enforced. They could run up as high a bill as they felt like on a credit card, and then wouldn't have to pay it. And an employee can only, so we'll see on that one. The mentally insane can't make contracts because they don't know what they're actually signing up for. And an employee can only bind a company's contract if it's reasonable to assume that they've got authority to do so. For example, the security guard on the front gate couldn't sign a company up for a new CCTV security system just because they felt that the current one wasn't sufficient. The company would be able to go to the supplier and say, well, who ordered that? And they'd say, well, it was the security guard on the front gate. And you go, but they weren't a director or they weren't a manager. It wasn't reasonable for you to assume that they had the power to be able to actually make that contract. So a contract might, therefore, not be made at all. For example, there's no offer and acceptance, or not be enforceable if there's, it wasn't legal or possible. There wasn't the capacity to make the contract. A party makes a misrepresentation, so that they lie about the way in which I say that this is a genuine Ming vase and sell it to you, and it's not genuine at all. And you can say, well, hang on a second, you agreed that was a genuine art vase. So. Also, it can be there'll be things in terms of whether the terms are fair, correct, or legal. So we'll see things like penalty contracts later on, and the contract may not be in the correct form. So sometimes there might be you can't have a verbal contract for property sales. So that's our sort of opening part to contracts. If we had our sort of contracts, then our contracts would be void. So contracts could be void. There's no contract because it's illegal. They could be voidable because one party could declare it void. So they could actually enforce the contract and bind the other party to the contract, but they could declare other parts of it void if they wanted to. Or it could be unenforceable because a clause that's included that can't be enforced, such as a penalty clause that is not supporting sufficient loss, that kind of thing. And quite often, actually, as a reviewer of the contracts myself, really, I go through and I'll agree to sign a contract, but I'll be there going, well, yeah, but just note that clause X, Y, and Z aren't enforceable, either because they're unreasonable, or mainly actually because the other person doesn't get any loss from that clause. So if they don't get loss in the clause, you don't go do one. You don't actually have to comply with the clause. So that's our opening bit of contracts. Now we're going to get into the detailed questions that you're going to see. So offer and acceptance. So to have an agreement, there must be an offer by one party and acceptance of that offer by the other. So that's what we need to have. We need to have offer and we need to have acceptance. And we're going to see lots of questions about what was an offer and what was an acceptance. So the offer must be unequivocal. And case law has highlighted areas where the offer has not been unequivocal and therefore not an offer. So prices on shelves are not an unequivocal offer. So if you go into a shop and you see, let's say I go along and I see a sort of £500 suit, but it's been mispriced and it's put down as £5. Yeah. And I grab the suit, in fact I grab a few of them, and I rush into the till and I say, you made me an offer, I'm accepting this offer for all these 10 suits for £5 each. You must sell them to me. Then you go, no, that wasn't an offer. We didn't make you an offer. All we did was we just invited you to make an offer to us about whether you wanted to buy those suits, and we've given an indicative price, which is what was on the actual suit. As it turns out, no, these suits all cost £500. Do you want to buy them or not? So prices on shelves are not an unequivocal offer. They're only an invitation to treat, and the offer is made when the goods are passed through the till with payment taken. If the price on the shelf is wrong, it cannot be enforced. You'll definitely see that one as questions. What about mistakes on websites, though? Mistakes on website prices cannot be enforced where the company has highlighted that mistakes can be rectified in its terms, which they will. So in this case, even if the payment's processed, so in this case, I've bought the suit for £5. I've put my £5 into my debit card in there and made the payment. Even in the case, this is even the case if the payment's processed. The offer and acceptance is made when the goods are dispatched. So when we have a website, the company will sort of set out that the offer is only accepted when the goods are dispatched. Now, an offer could be made by conduct. So we'll sometimes see this when conduct, and we can have it, but it has to be communicated to the other party. So, for example, if you raise your hand in an auction, that's an offer to buy the goods at the price. If the auctioneer accepts the offer, being the last person accepted, then they drop the gavel. That contract then is binding. So an offer has to be communicated to the offeree. Once communicated, the offer is terminated and cannot be accepted if the offeror terminates the offer. So I make the offer to the offeree. I say, I'll sell you this car for £25,000. Let's say, but then before the offeree has a chance to accept it, I say, no, actually, to be fair, no, it's not 25,000. It's actually 30,000. That's terminated the offer. Now, I could sort of say these things like the price is available for only a certain number of times as well. So that could be one way I could do it as well. Now, the offeree could reject the offer, say, no, I don't want to buy your car for £25,000, and that would be end of. I don't want to buy it at all. But most often, the offeree rejects the offer by making a counter offer. So you'll see questions about, was this a counter offer? So let's say I say, I'll sell you my car for £25,000, and they say no. I'll buy it off you for £20,000. Now they've destroyed the original offer by doing that. So the original offer is destroyed, and now there is an offer from the offeree to me, which is saying, do you want to sell me your car for £20,000? I might say no. I'll sell it you for £24,000. That's now destroyed their offer. But now they've got a new offer, and they go, no, I'll buy it off you for 23. So that's destroyed the £24,000 offer, and now there's a £23,000 offer, and I say, okay, fair enough. So remember, counter offers destroy offers. So, for example, saying that the price is too high, but then return. So let's say we're going into the thing that, and we've gone into this into a car sales room, and they sort of said, I'll sell you the car for £25,000, and you say no, and then you walk out. And you come back the next day and you go, actually, I'd like to buy the car for £25,000. You destroyed that original offer at £25,000. They go, no, actually, to be fair, it's gone up overnight. It's now £26,000. You can't go, but you made an offer, and that offer hadn't been destroyed, and so I'm going to accept that offer. It had. By sort of preventing a counter offer. Let's say I said, £25,000. I said, I'll buy it off you for 24. I've destroyed that offer. if I could say, well, look, the price is on the car, I said, well, that's just an invitation to treat. Okay, so those are the questions you might sort of see. Alternatively, the offer might just simply lapse, so it might just go through so it might just lapse. So it can lapse in two ways: either the offeror dies, so the offeror has just died, and therefore that's the end of that, or a reasonable time is given. It can be reasonable in terms of, well, you can't come back a month later on and say I'll accept that offer, or it could be that it's fixed. So I might give this price is only available for the next 3 days or whatever. Up to you. The offer is accepted if the offeree unconditionally accepts the terms of the offer, which is communicated to the offeror by word or by action. So you've got to unconditionally accept the offer, unless you make a condition. So let's say we now have conditional offers. So let's say you've agreed to you're going to sell me this. You've offered this Ming vase for like £1 million, whatever. And I say I'm going to buy that off you. I'll buy that off you for £1 million if you can provide me with a certificate of authenticity. So we've got offer here, and we have got acceptance, but a conditional acceptance. So there's got to be some performance of the condition. So the offer is accepted by the offeree when the conditions are performed. So let's say I sort of then provide you with that certificate of authenticity, but in the meantime the person decides they want to pull out of the deal. They can't. They've made their offer, it's been accepted subject to the condition, and the person who's accepted the offer has performed the condition. So they've done the. So let's say we take one that's in America. We've got Elon Musk wanted to buy Twitter. He sort of says, I will buy Twitter off you, subject to the conditions that you provide certain due diligence. Now there's a lot of arguments over whether the due diligence has been performed or not, really, but it was a very, very low level of due diligence that was required. Elon goes along and he wants to get out of the deal, so he starts to complain about whether there's too many bots, these Twitter users aren't real and whatever, and there's a lot of back and forth about it. But ultimately, he's a bit stuck really on the whole situation. We'll have to go through with the offer. There's been acceptance of the offer subject to the conditions. The conditions have been performed, and therefore the contract's in place. So we might have conditional offers. You might have conditional offers. You might have counter offers. You might have offers and acceptance, things like that coming up. Invitations to treat, those kind of things coming up as questions. So consideration. So we've had offer and acceptance. Now we've got to have consideration. So consideration must be of some value. Must be sufficient value. It doesn't have to be adequate value. So let's say you go along to a car boot sale and you see an antique in there. Somebody's offering to sell it to you for £1, but you know it's worth £100,000. You buy it quickly for £1 there, and then you go along and sell it for £100,000 later on. Or you go onto the antique roadshow or something, and you highlight this great bargain that you got. The person who sold it, you can't come back and say, well, but the amount that you paid me wasn't adequate. You should have at least paid me, instead of £100,000, you should have at least paid me £50,000 for that, and I'll sue you for the £50,000, less than £1 that you paid. That doesn't matter. All consideration has to be sufficient. There just has to be a transfer of value. It doesn't have to be adequate. Now, in the sort of the legal definition, it is not for the court to determine what goes through men's minds when they make deals. As is the judge phrase when it comes to consideration. It must be sufficient, but it does not have to be adequate. To be of value, it must represent a present or future transfer. So it can't relate to the past, so a past transfer of value, since that's already been performed, and there's no value. So let's say somebody goes along and they say, well, actually, I know we've agreed that you're going to buy, I'm going to buy this sort of ton of apples off you for £1,000, and the ton of apples have been provided and produced, and you go, haha, but I know you're suffering cash flow problems, so instead I'm going to only give you £500, take it or leave it. And well, that's not a deal, is it? Because that's related to past transfers of value, so there's no consideration there. So you take the £500 and then you sue them for the additional £500. Consideration's got to be performed completely. So you're going to have present or future transfers. Can't be past transfers. I can't go along, to my children and say, listen, look at all this value that I've given you in the past, putting a roof over your head and whatever. I think you should look after me in my old age, which I'd like to. Then they can't say, well, there's no contract, and that's not fair. And it's got to be legal or possible. So I can't enforce a contract that requires the transfer of illegal drugs or the purchase of a uniform. I just can't do it. So those are our considerations. The main one being that the value is sufficient, and it must be a transfer of value between both parties. So it's got to be a transfer of value between both parties as well. So we've got this sort of transfer of value between both parties. We've got a consideration, and now we've got then our next one is to completion of our contract, really. So now we can discharge a contract, we can complete it by performing the contract. So both parties perform the contract, and both parties complete their part of the bargain. Contract's completed. End of. Now the consideration is both. So we've sort of both parties we've performed our contract. We could breach the contract. One party doesn't complete all the parts of their contract, so of course we breach a contract in details then. Alternatively, we could terminate the contract. Now this terminate the contract isn't in the syllabus, but there's loads and loads of ways in which contracts can be terminated. They usually sort of set out in the contract as well, really, that the one party can terminate the contract, if the other person does material breaches or what have you, or alternatively, after a certain period of time. Most contracts actually for services run for periods of time, and they might even be open-ended periods of time, and the other party terminates it by providing notice to the other side. That's my main thing. Or alternatively, it becomes the case that it's not possible to complete the contract, something called force majeure, whereby, let's say we've agreed that we're going to sell some land, but actually, as it happens, the land's on top of a cliff, and the cliff all disappears into the sea. It's not possible. I can't sell you the land anymore. I could sell you the bottom of the ocean, but we can sort of see I don't really have the land anymore because it's disappeared. It's disappeared into a massive sinkhole. Something like that. Where it's just not possible, and it's nobody's fault. Typically, force majeure is where governments come along and they change the law and make it illegal. So it was legal, but no longer is. I've agreed to sell you some sort of ivory. Let's say the law on ivory is now changed. I can't do that anymore. Previously it was legal, it isn't anymore. Force majeure kicks in, and I can't fulfill the contract. And you can't come along and sue me for the ivory that you missed out on, even though you shouldn't have been after the ivory in the first place. So performance of the contract. So for a contract to be performed, it must be fully performed. So it can't be only partially performed, although many contracts in reality allow for partial performance, because obviously full performance is a bit harsh. So the key example of this is cutter versus power. So a lot of time you don't really sort of tend to see this in the syllabus, but when you get into professional standards, it's all past cases, really. So cutter versus power is the case in 1795, where a seafarer dies halfway through the voyage. It's around the world voyage. The seafarer dies partway through the voyage, and the widow tries to sue the ship for the part wages until Mr. Cutter died, and but she failed. And the reason why she failed was because he was signed up for the whole of the trip, and he died partway through, so he hasn't done full performance of the contract, and so the ship sort of kept hold of all the money. Seemed a little bit harsh, and but lawyers are quite often harsh. So he failed to complete the voyage, which was a specific performance of the contract, and there was no specific performance, and therefore no monies were due to the widow. Seems a bit cruel, really. Not necessarily sure I'd want to go down a legal history as well, being the meanie that did that to the poor widow. Anyway. This is 1795, I suppose. So we've got breach of contract. Let's get into breach of contract now. And in terms of breach of contract can be actual. So we can have actual repudiatory breach, where one party doesn't complete the term on the due date by performance. So they actually we've gone past a specific date. They've not achieved what was supposed to happen there, though. So, for example, they've not paid the money, any amounts due by the time it was due. We've agreed that there's 14 days, let's say, payment terms, and it's not been paid. So that's express breach of contract. Typically the express breach of contract is people don't pay. It could also be anticipated breach of contract as well, where a party is clearly not going to complete a term by a due date. So, for example, they've been given some money to build a building, but some months later, it's still not they've not compensed any works, or alternatively they told us we won't be able to achieve it by X time. Let's say in a supplier meeting. In many cases, there will be milestones in the contract that, having not been achieved, would allow one of the parties to terminate the contract. So, when I'm sort of saying there's termination as well of contracts, quite often there's milestone points within contracts that allows the other party to terminate if they've not been hit. So we can have our breach of contract there, and we can terminate a contract. Typically, whether there's somebody's breach, but what happens then if we've got this sort of breach of contract? Well, there's typically two types of damages that can be awarded for breach of contract. We've got legal damages, and this includes monetary compensation designed to put the claimant in the position to not suffer foreseeable loss. So foreseeable loss as a result of the breach of contract. They're trying to put them into the place that they should be if the contract had been performed. The key points to note are the claimant cannot seek to gain more than they would have if the contract had been performed. So they can't. So penalty clauses which are designed to intimidate performance of contracts. So let's say you and I agree that you're going to build a house, and it's going to cost £200,000. But I put a penalty clause in that says that if you don't build the house within a certain amount of time, you've got to pay me £2 million. Yeah, and it's clearly nonsense in terms of I've not suffered that amount of loss. There might be a bit of rental cost or a bit of inconvenience, but it's not £2 million. There is a penalty clause that can't be enforced because remember that's seeking to punish the breacher or the breaker of the law, and that's not what civil law is about. Civil law is about restoring the person who loses to the point where they should be if the contract had been performed, or in other civil law, to restore the loser, typically through monetary damages. It's not designed to punish. Criminal law is designed to punish. The loss must also be foreseeable at the time of contract, and what this is that there is not remoteness of damage. So if the damage was remote because it was unforeseeable, so for example, the loss of a valuable contract rather than typical existing trade, that additional loss was not foreseen and cannot be subject to damages. Unusually high levels of losses can only be sought if the seller is made aware of those losses when the contract's made. So the example here is there's a laundrette, and it's looking to it's going to buy some machines for its laundrette. Now the machines aren't provided, and the the seller is sued. The seller of the machines is sued for the lack of machines, the profits that this laundrette missed out on, and it could sue for reasonable profits that would typically make. But the laundrette claimed that it lost out on a really big contract that was very lucrative because these machines weren't provided. The seller wasn't made aware of that, so there's a remoteness here. On the one hand, the seller's not made aware of it, and on the other hand as well, this is unusual. They didn't have this contract before. As a consequence, the losses were remote and they couldn't be enforced. So if you tell the seller, well, I've got this massive contract, it's really important, you've got to be provided by X and Y, are you sure you're signing up into this? And they go, yep, okay, well then the damages aren't remote, they're known. But if the damages are remote, they can't be enforced. Now we could also, as well, under legal damages, allow one party to withdraw from the contract if the other party does not perform a material condition. A minor condition is not what's known as a warranty, and if that's breached, the party would not be able to withdraw from the contract, but can seek damages to rectify the warranty. So, for example, buying a new house, a leaking window is only going to allow the buyer to just require the house builders to fix the issue, not to have the house back. So you can't go, that's not full performance. Full and specific performance, because the house, the window leaks. Well, that's just a minor condition and a warranty, and so the house builder just fix the window. But what if legal damages aren't enough? And it's only if legal damages aren't sufficient that you can then go to equitable damages. So in equitable damages, they could be specific performance requiring somebody to perform their contractual obligations. So, for example, you and I agree that you're going to sell me a rare piece of art, this rare painting, and it was actually my great-grandfather who painted this painting, and I really want it back in the family. and you suddenly decide you're going to pull out of this this art sale and say, well, okay, I'm going to give you back the difference in the price. And I can say, well, that wasn't really what was important to me. The important thing that was important to me was that I had this piece of art that my great-great-grandfather had painted. I'm going to go to the court for an equitable damages and require you to hand it over. It's quite extreme. If you were just an art investor, I was just an art investor, I couldn't force you to. I'd just say, well, look, this is the amount that I lost out by not having that painting. Can I have that in terms of monetary damages? So specific performance is an equitable damage. Yeah. I could have an injunction. I could stop you doing something. So I agreed to sell you some land, and on this land we've agreed in the contract that you're only going to graze horses on this land because I look out from a castle. Which is miles go a bit wild here. I look out from a castle onto this land and I just want to see horses grazing in front of it. You decide to go to a planning permission, you're going to put some great big industrial complex on it, and I'm going to get an injunction. I'm going to stop you because I agreed, that was the contract. We agreed that you couldn't, all you could do on that land was graze horses. So that's an injunction. I can stop you doing something. I could do rescission though here. That actually, there's a fundamental breakdown. I'm sitting in my castle. I'm constantly stressed about what we're going to try and do next. So I want this land back from you because I'm going to own it back there. So I can have rescission, which is restoring the parts of the pre-contract position. So I'm going to have this back. You're going to have your money back. I'm going to have my land back, and horses are going to be on this piece of land really. So I can have that if you seem to be unfair. And remember, equity is about fairness. So you're being unfair in here, and it's equitable that I get the land back. Really, I've got to give you the money back for the land, but that's an equitable position. Now, equitable damages are not awarded if the claimants took too long to pursue the claim. So took too long to pursue the claim, or I failed to act fairly. So I might have tricked you and highlighted and sort of highlight, really hidden that contract term deep in the contract of it, or use some very strange wording. Although to be fair, on a property sale, that's tough. They're written out for a reason. If monetary damages were sufficient, so legal damages are sufficient, you can't seek equitable damages. Or if those equitable damages would cause undue hardship. So let's say I've agreed that you've got to replace any trees that that fall down on a piece of land that I've given you, but suddenly this one super rare tree is ridiculously expensive now to sort of find or whatever, and it would cause incredibly undue hardship if you had to sort of go and buy this tree and plant it, then that wouldn't be equitable. You might have to have a different tree. Or if the equitable order couldn't effectively be implemented because the court would not be able to enforce the order, so it's going to have to watch somebody all the time. You can't go for that. So those are our damages, contracts, and now we're going to go through legal damages and equitable damages. We could have a question which is sort of saying what's a legal damage and what's an equitable damage, something like that. Last bit, which sort of sits alongside contract law, really, and is almost sort of saying, well, we're not having contract terms here. This is over. These are sort of almost like standardised positions for requirements in contracts. So in the Consumer Rights Act 2015, it replaces the Sale of Goods Act 1979 with respect to sales to members of the public by business. So those sales involve contracts. When business sells to members of the public, consumers, those consumers are provided with additional protection that cannot be given away regardless of the contract put in place between two parties. So I could sort of say, a contract to you and say, yeah, you give up your rights to the Consumer Rights Act, and you go and accept it, and you go, fair enough then. But you still would go, yeah, but the Consumer Rights Act still applies because I'm a consumer, and I couldn't do anything about it. You could still sue me. So goods must be of satisfactory quality that expected, and services must be performed with reasonable care and skill. It should be noted that where items are on sale and noted as faulty, the consumer cannot then demand the goods to be as of new standards. So I couldn't, sometimes where you said it's sold as seen, where you've gone and bought a sofa, there's X display, and you can't go, oh, right, it's got a stain on it, I want that back as a new one. It's been sold as seen as that one, so there's not that. And within here, if it's such a ridiculously good price, then the courts won't enforce the Consumer Rights Act. If it's been clearly sold, it's sold as being damaged, the court won't go, yeah, but the Consumer Rights Act applies, and you're now going to go and give a new item there. Though doesn't apply in place that. Even in case you're thinking to be quite clever and getting new items for broken ones. If the goods are faulty, the consumer can return them up to 30 days and then get a full and immediate refund. Up to 6 months, they got the right to have these items repaired or replaced, and typically though you'll just get a refund anyway. And then up to sort of 6 years, it's going to depend upon the expectation of typical life of that product. And that also can apply to businesses as well in terms of what's expected. So let's say if there's something in the contract that sets out a reasonable life, typically let's say for a photocopier it might be, let's say, 5 years or whatever, and then if it breaks down in that period of time, we've got the expectation of price set out in the contract. Now, if the service is not to a reasonable standard of skill and care by the expected professional in that industry, so it's not a question that somebody's come along and said that I'm Mr. Cowboy, well, you've held yourself out as a plumber, you've got to perform to a plumber standard, and there's the right for a repeat performance with a service performed again. So repeat performance, you can have them back and they can fix it, or alternatively they keep coming back and sort of saying, look, I can't fix this. There's a right to price reduction really. So you can't keep calling the same professional out again and again and again. Eventually they can just go, oh, look, I'm going to knock something off the price here. So that's all of our contract law. Really, I think you can sort of watch this video and sort of have it just sort of sink in, because I've given these examples back and forth. Really, you're going to sort of do questions as well to try and get it right. But then, in terms of before the exam, listen to the key points and get it to just sort of sink in. That's where they're going to be. That's going to be the majority of the questions. Let's say we got. We've only got about 4 marks really for the contract law thing, of which 3 are going to be sitting in that key points section, and 1's going to be lurking around in the wider discussion point. But hopefully it's interesting for you anyway, and you should be able to get to understand it. In the next chapter, we're going to start to consider the external business environment. And so it's going to be quite weird, because this is going to be very, very sort of standalone as this chapter, not really sort of sitting to anything at all. And it's really A-level economics. So it's the introduction to A-level economics. So we're going to be looking at microeconomics, supply and demand curves, and types of goods. And we're going to look at macroeconomics, the government control of the economy, government fiscal policy, inflation, monetary policy, taxation, and the competitive environment. So there's quite a lot actually within. What I'm going to do in the next one is going to make it quite interesting to try and get it to stick in, but really, realistically, it's the opening part of A-level economics, and so there's a lot of time that could get buried in that, but we've got to get it right, because there's 10 marks in that, for that particular question. Hopefully that was helpful. See you in the next one. Bye bye.